landscape architect, and along with our colleague architect Mark Johnson, we worked with the State Fair Development Coalition starting back in, I think, 2012 on this series of plans. What we bring to the table is a view of kind of the physicality, but also landscape architects design our environments, but we also look at all the systems that are involved in our communities and how we can support those systems through site design and master planning and the built environment. And that's a lot of what Meta Expo is about. During my life, I've lived in cities in Mexico, in Miami, in Houston, Los Angeles, in London, Detroit, and one of the things that gets me really excited is urban form and how it affects our communities, how it affects how we live our daily lives, and the power that has economically, socially, how we treat our communities environmentally. And so some of the things that I want to talk about here today have to do with urban form and land use, the idea of a cultural landscape, which we all know this landscape, although right now we look over there and we say, oh, it looks a little worse for wear, is an incredible cultural landscape in the state of Michigan and in the city of Detroit. And I think that has incredible potential for placemaking and for economic prosperity and community at this site. So that's a lot about what Meta Expo is about. As when we started looking at this, the State Fair Development Coalition came to us and said, hey, they're selling the State Fair. We want to have a voice in this. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of community members who want to think about this. And our job is kind of to listen to what's going on. And then we do, through our process, an inventory and analysis, kind of a study of the site. And I have to admit that for years I drove by here and didn't give it much of a thought. And when I started looking at it and I started looking on Google, I was really amazed at the potential for this site. And I believe we have an interesting, that we started out really early with this bullseye, but it turns out that the State Fairgrounds is located right in the center of the Tri-County area. And you have in your handouts, you have some, whoops, I tore mine apart. You have a little 2-page handout that touches on what I think are some of the important parts to remember about the State Fair. And one is the location. It's the only place in Detroit where the railroad Amtrak 8-mile Woodward Avenue, which 31 communities in our metro area are connected along 8-mile and Woodward Avenue, and at least 1.7 million people live within a mile of those two corridors. It's also in place, so we have 8-mile Woodward major corridors, historic corridors that continue to be corridors for commuting and business and the connection of communities, the Amtrak and I-75. There's no other place in the city where that comes together. So that's really important for the success of a major development here. And it's an opportunity that shouldn't be missed. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Now I grab the thing. The other thing that is so important is this idea of cultural landscape. And I hope we can start talking about a cultural landscape, because the history that's already been talked about is so important for what a lot of people talk about, placemaking. How do we make a successful development that has jobs, that brings a community together, that's multi-layered, that's mixed use? You have to have people coming here. We have location, but there's also a deep emotional connection throughout the state to this piece of property. And if we don't pay attention to that, we're going to miss an opportunity. And that's where the concept of Meta Expo comes from. It's taking the legacy of the State Fair, its history of rolling out agriculture and industry and the culture of the city and this region, with a view of a State Fair for the 21st century. And what would that look like? And I think if you bring the historic preservation, the recognition of the cultural landscape and this authentic way to make place, We have a real strong, I think a really important site is, I guess what I want to say, that shouldn't be missed. So a lot of you have seen the site. You can ask questions about it. This master plan is a vision that the community put together, and I just wanted to mention that of what's possible and what compact transit-oriented development can look like, and that's development that's formed around transit so people can get around, and also this is the ideal space for a hub for our region that's connected to the region. We talked to a lot of people, and there were a lot of ideas about what should be here, and there were a thread of things that's on the front of the sheet that I think everyone was concerned about, and that's new economy jobs, which is jobs for everyone. Regional transit that works for our area, whether it's the new mobility push or rail or rapid bus transit. Stewardship of this historic place, sustainable development was on the top of everyone's list, and a mixed-use, human-scaled, fine-grained kind of community. And I think that the agreement of all that is what the 7 elements that are about, and what kind of demonstrates to us a concept called civic intelligence. I think civically within the community we have an understanding what the site represents, and that we need to collectively get together, face the challenges to do development here and make it equitable for everyone.
The Climate Action Subcommittee of Detroit, the Green Task Force, and President and CEO of Future Insight Consulting, LLC. She's convened strategic high-level meetings with elected officials, government representatives, academic, nonprofit, and business leaders to address a variety of environmental and workforce development issues. For a decade, she served as a legislative assistant for Congressman John Conyers. In 2013, Knott was selected for the White House Champions of Change Award for Community Resilient Leaders, very prestigious, awarded to leaders actively involved in addressing climate change and sustainability issues in their respective communities. Knott holds a BS in Education from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm a Madison grad, so I'm excited about that. An MS in Educational Leadership from Temple University, and a certificate in Executive Education Leadership from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Please welcome Kimberly Knott.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be here, and particularly want to thank Karen and Frank Hamer for the invitation to actually speak here. I was thrilled to learn that the State Fairgrounds Development Corporation is committed to implementing the Detroit Climate Action Plan. Everybody give a hand clap for that. And I will say a little bit more about that very soon. So for instance, in terms of how the Climate Action Plan is aligned with this particular project, according to the Detroit Greenhouse Gas Inventory, buildings and facilities, which constitute residential, commercial, institutional, industrial, and municipal energy use, accounted for 63% of citywide greenhouse gas emissions. And so when you look at the 7 elements to a 21st century fairgrounds, the citizens RFP, environmentally sustainable, is one of the most important elements that is on this sheet. And we have so much research to back that up. And so I want to give you a little bit of background information on the Detroit Climate Action Plan. I had the opportunity to work for John Conyers for over a decade, and he championed a variety of social justice issues, including voting rights, health care, and environmental justice. And this in turn fueled my desire to pursue a career focused in some aspect of social justice. So in 2009, I joined the staff of Detroiters working for environmental justice. That was a very important year because that same year I attended the United Nations Conference of Parties in Copenhagen, Denmark. And this is where they really began to focus on the Kyoto Protocol that led to the Paris Climate Agreement. So I was there, had an opportunity to actually convene environmental justice leaders, the White House, the EPA, and others to talk about why it is important to develop a protective binding agreement that focuses on reducing the impact of climate change, particularly for low income and communities of color. But one of the things that I also noticed there is that there was a document called the Copenhagen Accord. And in this document, this news document, it talked about all of the cities that were committed to reducing their greenhouse emissions, greenhouse or carbon footprint. And the city of Detroit was not on there. So I came home, thought about it a little bit. In 2011, convened some stakeholders, and in 2012, the Detroit Climate Action Collaborative was launched. And so our theme and my tagline is from the bottom up, by force, because Detroit matters. It matters because we didn't have time to wait on the federal government. We did not have time to wait on state government. We did not have time to wait on local government, and neither did we have time to wait on regulatory agencies. So we came together, a very diverse group of people that started out as around 12 and grew to over 40 people, including representatives from the environmental, community, governmental, scientific, academic, health, business and institutions, and other sectors. And this is the group that stayed together for over 6 years to develop the city of Detroit's first climate action plan. And so one of the things that we did during that is we established a steering committee. We conducted extensive research, developed a policy, facilitated focus groups, planned sector-based meetings, launched special projects, including several youth climate summits, and our Detroit Smart Neighborhood program. In addition to that, we developed 6 work groups: homes and neighborhoods, businesses and institutions, public health, parks, public space, and water infrastructure. And we also developed a pilot climate ambassador program. And so you might say, why did you have to do all that to develop a climate action plan? Well, because most climate action plans are developed at the municipal level, we had to build the case for why the city of Detroit should forge ahead with developing a climate action plan. So you've heard the saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We got tired of being on other people's menus, so we developed a table and then invited the people who we wanted at our table, because we realized that probably had we not led this charge, who knows if we actually would have been invited to the table or if this would have ever happened. Understand that during that time, bankruptcy was looming, and they were threatening the appointment of an emergency manager, both of which happened. So the time that this came out is one of the things that really makes it valuable and historic. So now we are moving into the implementation phase. So we've done all this work. How do we implement the climate action plan? Because developing it was just the first step. And so as the chair of the Detroit the Detroit Climate Action Plan of the Green Task Force, that's one of the things that I'm doing. And we're focusing on 3 areas of the climate action plan: businesses and institutions, which will look at minimizing harm, lowering risk, and adapting to climate change; homes and neighborhoods, which will look at addressing the age of housing stock and high electric bills through energy efficiency and conservation workshops; and public health, which is focusing on the health impact of climate change and working with city planning staff to understand climate adaptation concepts. And so this particular project is really a model of what should be going on throughout the entire city. And we hope that once you have developed this project, you are developing lessons learned so that other communities can do the same thing. The city of Detroit has 2 of the most polluted zip codes in the entire state. The asthma rates are higher here than they are in any other place in the state, and we actually rank nationally for the level of asthma rates that we have. One of the concerns that we have about this community is the type of development that may come. You know, we're not in favor of manufacturing facilities, and particularly facilities that are not sustainably designed. One of the reasons that 48219 and 48217 and 48209 are so polluted is because of all of the industry that are in those communities. And so coming from the environmental justice perspective, that's one of the things that we fight for. We look at the concentration of pollution, which is called cumulative impact. Not only that, what is the type of vehicle traffic that will be coming through here? When you talk about trucks, you talk about diesel pollution, which is also contributing to asthma, other respiratory illnesses, and in even some instances, different forms of cancer. So those are some of the things that you really have to think about when you're looking at whole design and designing communities from the ground up. So I think that this is a wonderful opportunity. One of the things that we'll also be focusing on through this task force and my company that will actually be leading the development of the Climate Action Plan is education and outreach. So talking to people about the importance of addressing climate change and understanding that climate change is not just something that happens in Antarctica, which is one of the reasons I co-produced a film from the bottom up, Climate Change in Detroit. We had a sold-out event at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History because it was important for us to show the impact that climate change has on urban communities. So we have a story to tell. And I'm so glad, again, to be invited to this event and look forward to working with you as you plan to implement the Detroit Climate Action Plan.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank our host for getting me here. I just want to say I used to go to the state fair, but to the gentleman that was talking about the ag shed, I never went in the ag shed. We were on the midway the whole time, learning about a whole nother world out there, crazy stuff going on. So anyway, an honor to be here today. The book I've written, Sustainable Nation, is really about the future. So even though I grew up in Detroit and a proud graduate of Cass Tech and that sort of thing, I mostly live in the future. Cass Tech? Okay. 75 don't take no job. That's what I can say to you, right? Does that sound familiar? But that's our motto. So I live in the future. I'm coming back to visit y'all from 2050, and I'm going to tell you, it's great here because we figured out how to get rid of all that carbon, all the things that everyone's been talking about. We figured it out. So I'm going to tell you what the steps were that got us here, okay? First thing is, in 2019, some of us wrote a book called Sustainable Nation. We realized at that time that for the first time in history, we could actually figure out how fast we were changing. And guess what? We were changing really slowly. That we had been dealt a carbon crisis, an urgent carbon crisis. We needed to get carbon out of our economy and out of our lives in 11 years from now. 2030 should be the year. Maybe we'll let it slide to 2050 because 2030 isn't looking that realistic, but we aren't moving that fast. In the book, we did a little research and just asked this simple question, said, what's the fastest the United States has ever changed, ever reversed course in history? What does that look like and how did that work? So we looked at cigarette smoking. Remember cigarettes? Nobody here smokes, right? So that was the single largest, most successful public health campaign in the history of our country. Public enemy number one, it still kills about 500,000 people a year. And what we did was track the progress of no smoking, cigarettes, peak of smoking, it goes down, and we put our carbon trend over the top of it, and it was sad news. So if y'all are ready for some sad news, here we go. If we quit carbon at the rate we quit smoking, we would get carbon out of our economy by the year 2150. 120 years too slow. Okay, that's the best we had ever done before, right? In terms of a public campaign where there's a profitable industry on one side selling this stuff to ourselves, killing us, but that was the fastest we'd ever done. So the book realized, OMG, we've got to figure out how to change a little faster. I got my notes on my phone. I'm not texting anybody. Don't worry about that. But there was one interesting footnote in history where we actually had changed really quickly. And my parents and our grandparents were always sort of proud, auto industry folks who were really proud of how Detroit and Cleveland and Chicago rallied during World War II to stop making cars and start making bombers and stop making washing machines, start making torpedoes in 18 months. So Detroit did it. It was a technological problem, and there was a common enemy, and he was an ugly dude with a bad mustache treating the world as holding it hostage. We could unite against the common enemy and pivot and get it done really quickly. But what I realized is the challenge we face today, described by everyone before me, is not a quick war. I mean, that was a 4-year war, basically. This is a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year campaign to rid ourselves of carbon, to make this pivot to a renewable economy. It's going to take a little while. So there wasn't an obvious model for which, and I will say we were motivated in World War II by fear. Fear. And fear will get you up for, a couple of years and maybe a few years, but not 30, 40, 50 years. You cannot motivate people for fear. You have to pivot. And here's the great insight I have, which is the thing that motivates people for 20 and 30, 40 years is love. It is hope. It is aspiration towards an equitable community, and that is what doubles back to be about the state fair. So I got a couple more notes. I'm not texting. So one thing about a campaign is every campaign to be effective has to agree on what success looks like for that campaign. So currently I think we're all over the place. Oh, let's reduce our energy use a little bit. That's considered success. It's not success. That's beneficial but not strategic. Success in my mind is this: carbon-free Detroit 2050. So what are the elements of success? We are a carbon-free place, and when is it due? 2050. Okay, there we go. So we've already, the title told you what we got to do, right? But to make it more specific, listen to this statement. On January 1st, 2051, the first day of the new year, right after 2050, Detroit wakes up, and Detroit no longer burns fossil fuels to power its buildings, heat and power its buildings, vehicles, grid, or industry. Right? That is success, okay? So internalize that. So the good news is, and remember, I'm visiting from the future, so I don't actually know you all. So no one here owns a car that burns fossil fuels, right? Nobody here today? No, of course. So we got check. That was easy. No, all our cars, if we have them, are going to be electric cars, right? That's going to happen. And actually, the auto industry is probably running a little afraid on that, but they got that going. What's the other thing that's really good news? Again, I'm visiting from the future. No one here lives in a building that's heated with gas during the winter, right? That's so archaic. Why would you do that? No one here. No, everyone here is heating their buildings with gas. So we got to figure out something called a beneficial electrification, which in our architecture projects in Chicago, we're figuring out how to heat a building without burning gas. And guess what? It's electrification again. You can see where all these trends are going. The grid. So DTE has a pretty dirty grid. They still run, I think, coal plants. What century are we in? DTE, I got a message for you. Wrong century. So they got to get out of the coal business, which is really basic, and then they got to get out of the gas business, because that's part of carbon-free Detroit 2050. And got out of the nuclear business. Let's talk that at the panel, because I think yes. Oh yeah, there's some bad things going on out there. But what I want to say was Boston has done a study that I want to share with you. A group in Boston, he just waved his hand. He does not like Boston, or he doesn't like studies, or something like that. I don't know. He waved his hand. Maybe it was a mosquito. So Boston did a study that said, well, what if we electrified everything? The cars, heating the buildings, all of it, what does that look like? What they said is if we didn't conserve energy while we electrified everything, the grid's got to get 3 times bigger. So you say no to, I say no to coal, I say no to gas, you say no to electric.
For me too.
For me too. For me 100, whatever. But so
gotta make the energy.
You got to make the energy from somewhere. Got to make the energy from somewhere, and we face a choice that is both economic and community building. So $1 spent expanding the grid, like either more new plants or more windmills or so on, is one kind of investment. It's a good green jobs investment. A better investment is insulation on a building. Who installs insulation on a building? Someone from Detroit. Hello, you can't get that from China, right? So a dollar spent on that is a dollar that's permanently in Detroit and prevents money from going out of town. So there is a fundamental choice we have in recognizing that decarbonization is, as Kimberly said, is an economic development campaign. So what does this have to do with the state fair? So when you look at, as we did in writing the book, you look at what's required. If you remember during the Obama administration, Barack always said, all of the above. Our energy policy should be all of the above, which included a fictional character called Clean Coal. So he had to get elected. Okay, fine. I love the man, whatever. But that was a fib. He knew it. But whatever. He got to serve 2 terms in the presidency. Thank goodness. No, if that was the biggest sin, that was love him. But anyway, I'm sorry, I've lost my point. I was making great jokes. Oh yeah. When you look at the future. So when you look at the future, what you realize is that we've got to do everything, all of the above. And so, what does this mean? This is not change that you can impose on people. You can't adopt a building code that compels you to do these things. How do I know that? I'm an architect. So I have architect friends. I don't do this, but my architect friends in Chicago, we have an energy code. It spells out how much energy your building can use. They trick it. Remember when Volkswagen did that with emissions a couple years ago? Yeah. Not naming names, but when you compel someone to do something they don't want to do, they'll pretend to do it, right? And so people have to want to do this. And so that's why I say it is not about fear, it is about hope and desire and seeing a happy, healthy future for you and your family in this economy. And so a lot of it has to do with being in a community where these are shared values. So again, the government can come in and wag its finger and say you should ought to do this or this kind of thing, or you can live in a community where these are the values, right? These are the values. And when you get to the end of this, all of the things that we might electrify and all the different ways we might make an all renewables grid, we're left with one kind of stubborn fact, which is airfare, air flight. There will not be electric planes flying from here to Kuala Lumpur. That will not happen. And there's an unfortunate kind of human trait, which is as things become more efficient, that is the fuel economy of a car, or in this case an airplane, gets better, the airlines don't say, this is wonderful. We're going to reduce the cost of a ticket 15% because we're using 15% less fuel. What do? They make longer routes. Now we can go nonstop from here to the moon. You know, it's now not a 17-hour flight, it's a 23-hour flight. And then next year it'll be a 27-hour flight. You'll be able to fly once around the planet and land in your home airport because the plane will be able to do it. And they'll sell that to somebody. But there won't be electric planes. And it will have to confront the reality, which is this is the enemy here. There's some evil players out there, but it's us and our lifestyles and choices we make. Even the companies that do the coal power plants are providing electricity we are asking of them. So what I think the fundamental is, the ultimate sustainable thing is a community you love so much you don't want to leave it. And so those temptations to fly to Kuala Lumpur, why would I go to Kuala Lumpur? I live at State Fair 2050. It's the coolest place. I'm on every committee. I don't want to miss a moment of the action. Screw the airport. Go out of business, whatever airport. So that to me is the future. Lived locally, sustainably, and hopefully we can talk about it. Thanks.
Working man in Detroit, in Michigan, and even Columbia. Let's bring to the stage the international man of equitable development and equality for every man, our own Frank Hammer.
So, welcome to you all. This has been the hard work of a lot of people who've done this on their own time as volunteers. We are not a nonprofit, 501c3 or anything like that. All of this has been put together by volunteers. And these are volunteers who have been working for the last at least 7 years, if not longer, because they have a vision of love for what's going to go on in that site across State Fair Avenue. And that's what has motivated us. And I really love what Doug Farr said about it's a combination of fear and it's a combination with love. And so what I want to do to express a little bit of both is, first of all, I'm going to ask you all, and if somebody has a video camera or a camera that's focused on everybody in the crowd, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do